There's a moment, right before the lights go out, where an F1 driver stops being human. Not metaphorically, neurologically. Their heart rate is already at 170 beats per minute. Their hands are completely still, and the part of their brain responsible for fear, for doubt, for that voice that says what if something goes wrong, has gone quiet. Not because they're not afraid, because they've trained themselves to go somewhere the fear can't follow. In 1988, Senna was on a qualifying lap at Monaco, McLaren MP44, the most dominant car in Formula One history. He was already 1.4 seconds faster than his own teammate, Alain Prost, a world champion, and he was still accelerating. He later said, and this is his exact quote, he said, "I was no longer driving the car consciously." Think about that. The greatest racing driver who ever lived, in the fastest car ever built, at the peak of the greatest lap he had ever driven, and he was not in control of it. Something else was driving the car. He got so frightened by what he felt that he came into the pits. He stopped the lap. He was on course for a performance that should have been impossible, and he stopped, because whatever had taken over scared him more than losing ever could. What was that feeling? What takes over when the conscious mind steps back, and why are some drivers capable of it, while others, equally talented, equally trained, equally fast in the dry, never find it at all? This is what's inside an F1 driver's brain at 300 kilometers per hour. Every thought, every reflex, every sensation they have no words for. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the fastest humans alive are not thinking at all. I want you to try something. Sit wherever you are right now, and for the next 10 seconds, I want you to process this. Count the objects in the room you're in. Track the temperature of your hands. Notice the sound outside the window. Listen to your own breathing. Remember what you had for lunch. And while you're doing all of that, I want you to make 5 decisions per second, each one irreversible, each one carrying consequences that will compound over the next 90 minutes. You can't. Nobody can. And yet, this is a slow Tuesday for an F1 driver. Under heavy braking, and I mean hard braking, the kind that happens 50 times a lap, an F1 driver experiences 5G of deceleration force, 5 times the force of gravity, driving their body forward into the harness. Their neck, which they train obsessively, specifically for this, is fighting to stop their head from snapping forward under a load that would buckle an untrained person completely. And while all of this is happening to their body, they are modulating brake pressure to within kilograms of the precise amount needed. Too much, flat spot on the tire. Too little, they miss the apex, lose half a second, compromise the next 3 corners. The margin for error is not small. The margin for error is essentially 0. The cockpit is 50 degrees Celsius. There is 130 decibels of noise. That is the threshold of pain for an average human being. The turbulent air from the car ahead hits them in the chest at 200 miles per hour. The vibration through the chassis is so intense that over a race distance, drivers have been known to lose feeling in their hands. And we haven't even started talking about the race itself. The gaps, the strategy calls, the tire cliff, the safety car nobody saw coming, the radio in your ear telling you your closest rival just pitted, and now you have 4 laps to extend your margin before you have to respond. This is the environment. This is what the brain is being asked to operate inside. And here's the thing. The average F1 driver, the ones who make the grid but never win championships, they cope with this environment. They manage it. They grind through it lap after lap, wringing every tenth they can out of a car that's punishing them for 90 minutes. But the great ones barely notice it. And the reason why is one of the most extraordinary things neuroscience has discovered about the human brain. There's a study you need to know about. In the 1970s, a psychologist called Herbert Simon ran an experiment on chess grandmasters. He showed them a real chess position, mid-game, for 5 seconds. Then he covered it and asked them to recreate it from memory. Grandmasters got almost every piece right. Beginners managed 4 or 5. Then he changed one thing. He showed them a board where the pieces were placed randomly. No real game logic, just chaos. And suddenly the grandmasters were no better than the beginners, because they weren't memorizing individual pieces. They were seeing patterns. Thousands of hours of chess had compressed the entire board, 32 individual pieces in 64 possible squares, into maybe 8 or 9 recognizable formations. Their brain wasn't doing 32 calculations, it was doing 8, each calculation containing 4 times the information. This is called chunking, and it is exactly what happens inside an F1 driver's brain. When a rookie approaches a corner, let's say Eau Rouge at Spa, their brain is running hot. Conscious processing, entry speed, break point, turn-in marker, apex position, exit line, curb width, surface texture, grip level, all of it competing for bandwidth simultaneously. They're overloaded before they've even touched the brake pedal. 3 seasons later, at that same corner, none of that is conscious anymore. The breaking point isn't a calculation. It's a feeling, a muscle memory tied to a shadow on the tarmac 200 meters before the corner. The entry speed isn't a number, it's a sensation in their chest. The exit line isn't a decision, it's what the hands do. All of that cognitive work, everything that was burning bandwidth in year 1, has been compressed into a single automatic trigger. Familiar sensation. Execute. No deliberation, no verification, no lag. And what does that free up? The conscious mind, which is now sitting there in the cockpit, liberated, able to look 3 corners ahead, to listen to the radio, to manage the gap, to feel the tire degrading through the steering column and make a strategic decision about whether to push or protect. The rookie's brain is fully occupied driving the car. The champion's brain is playing chess while the car drives itself. But here's where it gets even stranger. Because the chess that the champion's brain is playing, that's not the whole story. That's not what Senna felt at Monaco. To understand that, we have to go somewhere deeper. There are 2 memory systems in your brain. Explicit memory, everything you consciously know. Implicit memory, everything your body knows without telling you. Explicit memory is why you can describe how to ride a bike. Implicit memory is why you can actually do it, without thinking about it, while having a conversation about something else entirely. These 2 systems do not share processing power, and here's the critical thing. Implicit memory is not slow, it is not a fallback, it is faster than any conscious thought you've ever had. It lives in a region of the brain called the basal ganglia, ancient, deep, below language, and it operates in timescales that make conscious deliberation look embarrassing by comparison. Fernando Alonso's hands begin to correct oversteer approximately 70 milliseconds before Fernando Alonso consciously registers that the car is oversteering. His body is solving a problem his mind doesn't know about yet. By the time the signal reaches his prefrontal cortex, by the time conscious thought enters the picture at all, the correction is already halfway done. This is not reaction speed. This is something fundamentally different. This is a system that has been trained so deeply, through so many thousands of repetitions, that it has built its own predictive model of the car, the tire contact patch, the grip limit, the slip angle, and it is running that model continuously, invisibly, correcting errors before they propagate. The conscious mind is not invited to this process, it's not needed. And the drivers who understand this, who have learned, through years of experience, to trust that deeper system instead of overriding it with conscious anxiety, those are the ones who find something extraordinary, something that only a handful of humans in any sport, in any generation, ever discover. In 1975, a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi published research that would eventually change how elite sport understood performance. He called it flow. He'd spent years studying artists, surgeons, mountain climbers, musicians, people who described a state where the sense of self dissolved, where time either slowed or ceased to exist, where action became effortless, where performance reached levels they couldn't reproduce consciously. The athletes called it the zone. Neuroscientists call it transient hypofrontality, a temporary shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that worries, that second guesses, that says, what if I get this wrong? In flow, that part goes offline. And what remains? The deeper systems, the implicit networks, the pattern recognition machinery built over 10,000 hours, operates without interference. For the first time. Completely. This is what Senna found at Monaco. The prefrontal cortex, the part that knew it was doing something impossible, switched off. And everything underneath took over. The decades of training, the thousands of hours of circuits absorbed into muscle and synapse, running free. Without the conscious mind's interference slowing everything down, he went 1.5 seconds faster than anyone else alive. And it terrified him. Because how do you come back from that? How do you drive a normal lap, knowing there's a version of you that operates beyond your own control? How do you access that place deliberately when accessing it deliberately is precisely what destroys it? Here's the cruelest thing about flow state. You cannot decide to enter it. The moment you try, the moment you become aware of it, the prefrontal cortex wakes up again. Self-monitoring returns. The state collapses. This is why Senna came into the pits. He became aware of what was happening, and awareness killed it instantly. This is why drivers describe their best laps in passive language. The car was just there. It felt effortless. I wasn't really thinking. They don't take credit because they genuinely weren't in charge. The deeper machine was running the show. And here's something that almost nobody talks about. The drivers who find flow most often, the ones who can re-enter it most reliably, are not always the most technically gifted. They are the ones who have learned to get out of their own way, to shut up the part of the brain that wants to manage everything, to trust the dark. Raikkonen never looked like he was trying. Schumi, at his peak, looked bored. Senna looked like he was somewhere else. They were. For everything the expert brain can do, all the chunking, all the implicit mastery, all the flow, there is a point at which it breaks. It doesn't bend. It breaks instantly. November 29, 2020, Bahrain, lap 1. Romain Grosjean goes straight on into the barriers at approximately 220 kilometers per hour. The car splits in half, bursts into flame. He was trapped inside for 28 seconds. What I want you to think about is not the fire. What I want you to think about is the half second before the impact. In that moment, Grosjean's implicit system, his basal ganglia, his trained automatic responses, encountered something it had never been trained for. A sideways trajectory at terminal velocity with zero grip and zero recovery available. When the implicit system hits the edge of its training data, when the pattern no longer matches anything in memory, it does something dramatic. It hands control back to the conscious mind, but before that handover, in the fraction of a second before the barrier arrives, there is a mathematical point of no return that every racing driver knows exists and prays they never find. Grosjean's slip angle crossed that boundary in approximately 0.3 seconds. The physics equation was already resolved. The wall was already written into the mathematics of the moment, and the prefrontal cortex woke up just in time to watch it happen. And the prefrontal cortex, for all its capacity for language and planning and self-reflection, is catastrophically slow. 250 milliseconds to process. 250 more to respond in a situation that resolved in under a second. This is not a failure of skill. This is not a failure of nerve. This is a fundamental architectural limitation of the human brain, and it doesn't take a crash to trigger it. A botched pit stop, an unexpected safety car, a driver cutting across you in a corner you thought was yours. Any of these events forces you out of implicit automatic processing and back into slow, deliberate, conscious thought. Your bandwidth, which was being used for strategy and tire feel and gap management, suddenly floods with the task of just driving the car. Things that were automatic are now deliberate again, and deliberate is slow, and then it compounds. One mistake, conscious mind activates, starts monitoring performance, catches another mistake, gets louder, slower, more mistakes. You've seen this. Every race fan has seen this. A driver who looks collected through 30 laps, then something small goes wrong, and suddenly they look like a different person, locking up, clipping curbs, a second off their pace and falling backwards. Their brain isn't broken. Their brain is doing exactly what brains do when taken out of flow. It starts thinking, and thinking, in a racing car at 300 kilometers per hour, is the most dangerous thing you can do. There are drivers, lots of them, who are nearly as fast as the best in the world, who can match them in the simulator, who can post competitive times in testing, who win lower series and arrive in Formula 1 and show everyone exactly why they deserve the seat. And then the race starts, and the gap appears. Not always in the fast corners, not always in the qualifying trim, but in lap 40 of 57. When the tires are done and the race is on a knife edge and the call comes in from the pit wall, that's going to require a decision in the next 3 corners. That's when you see it. The best drivers in history, and I mean the ones who changed the sport, the ones we're still talking about decades later, shared one quality that set them apart from everyone else. They could access the quiet mind under fire, not when everything was going well, when everything was going wrong. Donington Park, 1993, European Grand Prix, wet, cold, treacherous. Ayrton Senna starts from 4th. On the opening lap, one lap, he overtakes 4 cars, including Michael Schumacher, including Damon Hill, including Alain Prost, in rain so bad that everyone else is managing survival. His brain was not receiving the fear signal that the others were. Not because he was reckless, not because he couldn't feel it, but because his relationship with his own fear response was fundamentally different. He had learned, through some combination of wiring and experience and sheer accumulated hours, to let the deep system run, even when every biological signal was screaming at the prefrontal cortex to take over. Lewis Hamilton, Abu Dhabi, 2021. The race that changed Formula 1 history. In the final laps, on worn tires, in a situation that would have shattered most athletes psychologically, Hamilton was still doing his job, lap after lap, managing, fighting, not collapsing. He lost that race in circumstances that had nothing to do with his driving. But watch those final laps. Watch his data. Watch his lines. He did not panic. And that is a superhuman thing. Verstappen at Brazil in 2016, 18 years old, first full season, Interlagos in the wet, one of the most challenging conditions in the sport. He drove that race like someone who had been doing it for 20 years. Clean, aggressive, completely composed. Asked about it afterwards, he shrugged. This is the gap that separates elite from transcendent. And the brutal truth, the thing that makes it agonizing for every incredibly talented driver who falls just short, is that this quality is almost impossible to train deliberately. You can build implicit memory, you can work on flow triggers, you can meditate, you can sim for 1,000 hours. But the moment of true pressure, the moment that matters, cannot be replicated. The brain knows the difference between a simulation and reality. The cortisol is different, the stakes are different, the consequence is different. The crucible that builds a Senna or a Hamilton or a Verstappen is real, irreplaceable, unrepeatable. Which means there are drivers out there right now, drivers with the talent, with the data, with the machinery, who will never reach that level. Not because they're not fast enough, because the specific circumstances that forge that final quality never came for them at the right time. That's not failure, that's fate. After a Grand Prix, a driver has lost 2 to 4 kilograms of body weight. Their cortisol, the stress hormone, is at the upper edge of what the body can tolerate. Their neck muscles are in genuine pain. Their hands are trembling from vibration. And still, for most of them, that is not the part that takes the longest to come back from. What takes time is returning from there. From that state where time bends, where the prefrontal cortex goes offline, where something deeper, something that doesn't have a name in any language, takes the wheel and does things you couldn't do consciously if you tried for the rest of your life. Ayrton Senna said driving was a form of prayer. Lewis Hamilton meditates before he puts the helmet on. Max Verstappen sleeps 10 hours a night, not because he needs it physically, because what he does on the circuit costs something that you can only pay back in silence. These aren't personality quirks. These are people who have learned to access a part of themselves that most human beings never know exists, a part that is faster than thought, quieter than fear, more precise than any calculation the conscious mind could make in the time available, and they have to protect it. Because the one thing you cannot do, the one thing that will kill it faster than anything, is want it too much. Senna went back out after that lap at Monaco. He went faster. He won pole by more than a second. He never fully explained what happened, what he felt, what scared him. Maybe the words didn't exist. Or maybe, and this is what I keep coming back to, maybe he understood that saying it out loud would make it fragile, that some things only work when you don't look directly at them, at 300 kilometers per hour, with everything on the line. That's the only place in the world where you can be afraid of your own potential, and some drivers find it. And when they do, you already know what it looks like. You've watched it your whole life, you just never knew what you were seeing.